We find Carloads, the junk man, in his house office, counting his meager earnings from the cast-offs of others. He wasn't a cruel man, but his heart had hardened like the rusted bolts in his yard. The office clock ticked loudly, its steady rhythm interrupted only by the faint whistle of wind slipping through the cracks of the old junkyard windows.
Bah humjunk. Christmas. Just another day for folks who waste their money on shiny things that'll end up right back here.
He rose from his creaky chair and prepared to head to his bed above the junkyard. A sudden chill filled the room. The air seemed to hum, and the flickering light cast long, eerie shadows.
Who's there? I've got a wrench and I'm not afraid to use it.
As the shadow gathered appeared, it startled Carlos. The figure was draped in chains, long, tangled chains of keys, locks, and rusted tools. Its face was pale, yet familiar.
Carloads, do you not recognize me?
No, it can't be. Edgar Scrapwell? But you've been dead for at least 5 years.
Indeed. I am Edgar Scrapwell, your former partner in Junk and Jumbles. I've come to warn you.
Warn me? About what?
These chains, Carlos, these are the burdens I've forged in life. Every deal made without kindness, every treasure I turned to trash, every soul I turned away, they've bound me for eternity. And you, Carlos, have forged a chain, even longer.
Nonsense. I run a business, that's all. People don't come to me for charity, they come to offload their junk.
Tonight, you will be visited by 3 spirits. Heed their lessons, Carlos, or your fate will be sealed.
Before Carlos could respond, Edgar's ghost began to fade, the light around it dimming until it was gone. The room fell silent, but the chill lingered.
Spirits, lessons, humjunk. It's just the draft getting to me.
But deep down, a flicker of unease stirred in his heart. As the clock struck midnight, a strange sound echoed through the junkyard, a soft, tinkling melody like the chiming of bells made from broken glass. The first spirit was near. Carlos laid sleeping, a blanket wrapped tightly around him. The tinkling melody grew louder, and a soft, golden light filled the room. Suddenly, the light gathered itself into a figure, a shimmering apparition dressed in flowing robes that seemed to be woven from the sunlight of forgotten mornings.
Carloads, I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Why are you here? What do you want with me?
I am here to show you the Christmases you have left behind. Come, take a trip with me.
Carlos stood stunned as the room dissolved into mist. When the mist cleared, Carlos found himself standing in a modest living room. It was warm and bright, the air filled with the scent of pine and freshly baked cookies.
Do you recognize this place?
It's my childhood home. That's me.
He pointed to a small boy sitting cross-legged by the fire, his eyes wide with wonder as he unwrapped a gift. It was a shiny red wagon.
That wagon. I love that thing. I used to collect anything I could find. Rocks, sticks, even bits of metal. My dad used to call me his little junk man.
Do you remember how happy you were? Not because of the wagon itself, but because it came from the people who loved you.
That was a long time ago.
The scene shifted, and they were now in a bustling junkyard. A teenage Carlos stood beside an older man with kind eyes and grease-stained hands.
Mr. Scrapwell.
This toolkit is for you. You've got a knack for this, kid. One day, you'll run this place. Just remember, junk is only worthless if you treat it that way. Every piece has a story, and every person who walks through that gate does too.
Edgar believed in me when no one else did. He gave me my start.
And what did you do with that start?
Before Carlos could answer, they were in a new place. This time he saw himself as a young man, standing behind the counter of his newly acquired junkyard. A woman entered, her eyes red from crying. She held out a small, battered music box.
Please, this belonged to my daughter. I just need enough to get through the week. I'll buy it back when I can.
I'll give you $10 for it.
But it's worth so much more to me.
You can buy it back for 20. I don't remember being so callous.
You began to see the world not as a place of stories and connections, but as a ledger of profits and losses. This moment was one of many when you lost sight of what truly mattered. Remember, Carlos, the past is not a chain to bind you, but a lesson to guide you. Learn from it.
And with that, the ghost of Christmas past vanished, leaving Carlos alone in the cold, silent room. But now, his heart felt heavier than ever. Carlos sat in his office chair. The memory of the ghost of Christmas past lingered like a chill in the room. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of hearty laughter and the clatter of metal. He looked up to see a towering figure standing in the middle of the room. The ghost was wrapped in a patchwork coat made of vibrant fabrics, adorned with junkyard treasures, bottle caps, crushed soda cans, and bent silverware. The ghost carried a torch that glowed like the warmest fire Carlos had ever seen.
I am the ghost of Christmas present. Come, Carlos, and see the world as it is today.
Before Carlos could protest, and the room began to spin. When it stopped, they were standing in a modest kitchen. A small family was gathered around a table, sharing a simple meal. The father, a tired-looking man with grease-stained hands, raised a toast.
To making it through another year, and to finding something good in the junkyard tomorrow.
That's Joe. He's one of my regulars, always digging through the scrap for parts. What's he doing here?
Look closer, Carlos.
I'm sorry there's no money for the kids' gifts this year. Maybe next time.
It's okay. We'll find something. And you know, Carlos, if anyone's got something we can use, he does.
They think I'd give them something for free?
Do you think you would?
Before Carlos could answer, the scene dissolved, and they were now in a dimly lit shelter. A small group of people sat together on mismatched chairs, sipping from steaming mugs. A woman stood up holding a tattered blanket around her shoulders.
I found this at Carlos's yard, cleaned it up, and now we have a little light at night. Funny how something someone threw away can still be so useful.
Carlos doesn't care about the people who need these things. But his junkyard? That place is a treasure trove, if you've got the time to dig.
They think I don't care. I'm just running a business. I can't be responsible for everyone's problems.
But what if you could do more? You have the power to turn scraps into hope, Carlos. Instead, you've chosen to turn away.
With a flash, Carlos found himself in another location. This time, they were in a dark, empty room. A lone child sat on the floor, playing with a broken toy truck. The child's mother appeared in the doorway, her face tired but kind.
Come on, sweetheart. Time for bed. Maybe Santa will find us next year.
That boy? I've seen him before. His mother came to my yard last week, asking for help. I told her I didn't run a charity.
And so, Carlos, you turned them away. What would it have cost you to show kindness?
Before Carlos could answer, the ghost's booming laughter returned, though it now carried a note of sadness.
My time is short, Carlos, but before I leave, look upon me.
Carlos turned and gasped. Clinging to the junk of the ghost's robe was two small, hollow-eyed children glaring at Carlos. One was thin and sickly, the other wild-eyed and desperate.
Who are they?
They are want and ignorance. They are the fruits of your indifference. Beware them both, Carlos, but especially beware ignorance, for it is the path to ruin.
The spirit's torch flared, and Carlos found himself back in his office, trembling. The air was still, but he knew the night was far from over. The clock struck 2, and a shadow began to creep into the room.
Please make it all stop. I can't see anymore.
The clock's chime echoed through Carlos's office, each strike more haunting than the last. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. From the darkness emerged the final spirit, a tall, cloaked figure draped in black, its face hidden within a deep hood. The ghost of Christmas, yet to come, moved silently, its presence chilling and ominous.
You're the last one, aren't you? The ghost of Christmas, yet to come.
The figure gave no reply, but it raised a bony hand, pointing toward the door.
Do I have a choice?
The spirit's hand remained fixed, its silence more unnerving than any words. Carlos rose slowly and walked into the swirling mist. When the haze cleared, they stood in the heart of Carlos's junkyard, but it wasn't the lively, cluttered place he knew. Instead, it was eerily quiet, the piles of scrap rusted and crumbling, the air thick with neglect.
What's happened here?
The ghost pointed toward a group of people gathered near the entrance. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces grim.
Yeah, the old junk man finally kicked the bucket. Guess it was bound to happen. He didn't have anyone left to care for him.
Well, he cared for no one, so I suppose it's fitting.
Are they talking about me?
The ghost didn't answer, but raised its hand again. The scene shifted to a small, unkempt graveyard. Weeds grew wild between the gravestones, and the air was heavy with decay. The spirit led Carlos to a solitary grave. The headstone was plain and weathered, the name barely legible.
Carloads, forgotten but not forgiven? No, this can't be. I don't want to end up like this. Please, tell me this is just a possibility, not a certainty.
The ghost's hand remained fixed, pointing at the grave. The silence was unbearable.
I can change. I will change. I'll make things right. I'll help those who need it. Just give me a chance.
For the first time, the ghost spoke. We shall hope. We shall hope. It lowered its hand, and the shadows around it began to dissolve. The graveyard faded, and Carlos found himself back in his office. The clock struck 3, but the air felt different, warmer, lighter. Carlos sank with his heart racing back into bed. The weight of the night's lessons pressed on him, but for the first time, he felt something else, a flicker of hope. Carlos awoke with a start, the sound of the final chime still ringing in his ears. Morning light streamed through the window, bright and golden, warming the cold corners of his barely furnished bedroom.
I'm alive. I'm alive, and it's Christmas morning.
He rushed to the window and let the sun shower his body with life. The crisp air bit at his nose, but he hardly noticed. Children played in the street, and the sound of carols drifted from a nearby church. For the first time in years, Carlos felt a lightness in his chest.
I'll make things right. No more hum-jump for me.
Carlos threw on his sweater and cap and headed out to his junkyard. The piles of scrap and rusted treasures glinted in the sunlight, and for once, he saw them not as junk, but as possibilities. Carlos sets out on righting the wrongs. His first stop was Joe's house. Carlos carried a toolbox filled with carefully selected parts he'd cleaned and repaired. When Joe opened the door, his eyes widened.
Carlos, what are you doing here?
Thought you might need a few things for these projects of yours. No charge.
Are you serious?
Dead serious. Merry Christmas to you and the kids.
Next, Carlos made his way to the shelter. He brought lanterns, blankets, and a cart full of repaired household items. The shelter residents stared in disbelief as Carlos unloaded his gifts.
Is this some kind of joke?
No joke. Just a junk man realizing his junk can make a difference.
By midday, Carlos had visited nearly every house and family he knew, spreading goodwill with every stop. He delivered a repaired music box to the woman who had once pleaded for it and smiled as her tears of joy glistened in the sunlight.
I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me. Merry Christmas.
As the sun set, Carlos returned to the junkyard, exhausted but happy. He set up a small table by the gate, loaded it with cookies and hot cocoa, and invited anyone who passed by to join him. To his surprise, people came, neighbors, customers, even folks he barely knew. They laughed, shared stories, and sang carols around a makeshift fire built from old barrels. For the first time, Carlos felt a part of something larger than himself. The flicker of hope that had stirred in his heart grew into a warm, steady glow. That night, as the last guest departed and the fire died down, Carlos looked up at the stars.
Thank you. Thank you for showing me what I'd forgotten.
From that day forward, Carlos Carloads was a changed man. His junkyard became a place not just of scrap and salvage, but of second chances and new beginnings. And every Christmas he celebrated with an open gate and an open heart, his laughter mingling with the carols in the frosty night air.
And remember, it's not easy being Carlos. Oh, fricka, finna bladas, hama,
in the heart of the junkyard, where scraps lay still, lived a man who had forgotten goodwill. But the ghost of Christmas opened his eyes to the joy and hope in the things we despise. Oh, it's a junkyard Christmas, love in the air, finding treasure in the things we repair. Turn the broken into something bright. It's a junkyard Christmas, everything feels right. From the lanterns glowing in the shelter's halls, to the kids unwrapping toys big and small, Carlos learned it's not what you sell, but the kindness you share that rings the bell. Oh, oh, it's a junkyard Christmas, love in the air, finding treasure in the things we repair. Turn the broken into something bright. It's a junkyard Christmas, everything feels right. With a cup of cocoa and a warming flame, Carlos found joy, not fortune or fame. In the laughter and love, his heart took flight, and the junkyard became a beacon of light. Oh, it's a junkyard Christmas, let's all sing of the peace and hope this season brings. From broken to whole, from lost to found, it's a junkyard Christmas, love all around.
Merry Christmas to all. From me,